Hello and welcome. So, before we begin, I want to invite you to land in your body before we start speaking. You don't need to change your posture or fix your face or pretend to be okay in this moment if you're not. I just want you to be here, embodied and present as you are. That's all you have to do. So let's collectively, before we begin, take one slow breath in through our noses and then out through our mouths. And let's do one more. Not for survival, but for arrival. So, I want to begin with a truth. For most of my life, suicidal ideation was a background hum. Not always loud, but always there. A soft echo in the corner of the room, a quiet fantasy of escape. A haunting sense that I didn't belong, that I was too much, that I was not enough, that I wasn't worth time or understanding. Maybe some of you know that hum. Maybe you've lived with it so long, it's some sort of white noise, a familiar place that almost feels like home. And if that's you, I want to say this gently but very clearly. You are not broken. You are not beyond hope. And you are certainly not alone. I'm not here to sell you a 5-step plan to joy. I won't tell you how to think positively or manifest your way out of the dark. What I want to share with you are the revolutionary acts that helped me rewire my despair. These acts weren't perfect, they weren't linear, but they were real and they really changed me. Some of them are spiritual, some of them are about the body, and some of them are really fiercely practical. All of them are holy, though. These are the ways that I told my body, you get to stay. You deserve to stay. And maybe by the end of this, you'll find one or two small revolutions that whisper the same thing to you. So let us, please, begin. So let's talk about Revolutionary Act 1, revolutionizing the way that I eat. I want to start with something really deceptively simple, food. There was a time when food for me wasn't about nourishment. It was about transaction. Eat to survive, eat to cope, eat to numb. Sometimes eat to punish. And I didn't understand that some of what I was eating, especially things like processed dyes, red 40, was literally making my emotions harder to regulate. And I want to say that again. Some of what I was eating was making it harder for me to want to live. So I started to cut it out slowly, intentionally. And I began to read labels, not because I was afraid of my body, but because I wanted to partner with it. And then I noticed something radical. My rage, it started to soften. My crashes didn't hit as hard. My moods had more breath in them. And so this isn't like a diet pitch. This is about sovereignty. I also started relating to food differently. Now when I prepare a meal, I bless it. I talk to my meal. I thank it. I treat it like it has a soul of its own. Because if a plant responds to Mozart, why wouldn't my soup respond to love, right? So this isn't about Christianity or praying over food. It's about really connecting with your food, as if it has an intention, as if it has a soul. So if you want, let's try this together. If you brought a drink or a snack, place your hand over it. If not, you can imagine one thing that you'll eat later today. Now say out loud, or you can say this in your heart if you want. Thank you for nourishing me. May you bring me peace. May this food that I'm about to eat, bring me strength. May you bring me clarity. May you feel nourishing within the realms of my body. And that, my friends, is a revolutionary act. When you connect with what you consume in a more conscious way, regardless if it's our food or whether it is the content in which we are consuming online or our relationships, your life becomes infinitely better because you are much more aware of what you are taking in. And whether that is, the food that we are eating, or whether that is the content we are consuming either on our television sets or online, we need to be really critical of our consumption. Now, I recognize for some people who struggle with things like disordered eating, or, maybe they grew up in a spiritual home, it can be really difficult to use these practices. And you can alter these, you can hack these any way that you want, because really at the root is being aware with what we're consuming, being conscious of that, and treating it with dignity, treating it with respect, not treating it as this thing that we are just consuming, but being more intentional with it. And now for Revolutionary Act 2, Birds and the Medicine of the Ordinary. There's a bird sanctuary where I walk most mornings. At first, it was just something to do, a place to breathe. But over time, the birds started to teach me. The songs that they sang, they became sort of this medicine for my soul when I felt alone. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't performative, it was just alive and present and free. I couldn't always make sense of what I was feeling, but then I listened to the birds. Something in me slowed down. The anxiety, it lifted. The despair, it unclenched. Even just a little. And that shift, it really saved me. There is a 2022 study that showed that 6 minutes of birdsong can actually reduce anxiety and paranoia. Just 6 minutes. So let's try this together. Close your eyes just for a moment. Picture a bird, any bird, see it on the branch or flying overhead. Now imagine it opens its mouth and it just sings. Not for you, not for anyone. Just because it can. Just because that's what it was born to do. Now I want you to feel that freedom. I want you to feel it ripple through your chest. Deep breath. You don't need to be useful to be allowed to exist. You don't need to explain your worth. The birds, they really reminded me that life is still happening, and I'm allowed to be part of it. So if you can, get yourself in nature and just be present with birdsong. It's been proven to help our mental health. And let's say you are having a low spoon day. Those days where we can't even get ourselves out of bed. There are plenty of songs that have been produced over the years that have chirping birds in them, whether it is the very end of Champagne Supernova by Oasis, or whether it is Blackbird by the Beatles. You can even just get onto YouTube and listen to bird song videos. You don't have to be relatively out in nature, although it is helpful to get your body moving. But birdsong, something that really helped heal, that has been proven scientifically to heal, and is just so simple to do for just 6 minutes a day. Now, revolutionary act 3, the social detox. This one's going to touch a nerve. I used to believe that loyalty meant keeping everyone in my life. Family, friends, people that I grew up with, even if they drained me, even if they misunderstood me. Especially as someone who's neurodivergent, I often found myself, being the mirror for other people's projections. They saw in me what they were afraid of looking at in themselves, right? So I tried to shrink myself to make them feel safe. That's what we do. But eventually, I realized that is not love. That is actually survival. And that safe relationships don't make you shrink who you are to appease other people. So I actually detoxed. I grieved. I deleted. I cried. Certainly a lot of tears. But then I began to fill that space with people who asked good questions and who didn't flinch at my grief, that didn't make me feel like I was too much, who just simply stood with me without trying to fix me. They really just tried to understand me and where I was coming from. So let's do a little short reflection on this, okay? You might want to grab your journal or just sit with these questions and really kind of think about them deeply. So for me, it looked a little like this. Why am I the one that is always reaching out? And why do I feel lonelier around them than I do by myself? Why do I feel leaving unseen, misread, or punished even for being real? These are nervous system injuries. Let's be real here. Tiny little ruptures every time I silence myself to preserve a connection. Micro abandonments, energetic betrayals. I always felt as though I didn't have my core sense of self. It was being torn from me. And I wondered why I was feeling the same things in my physical body when I was around these people that I felt during moments of really, really, really intense trauma. And I realized when I was experiencing these intense traumas, my feelings weren't being heard or acknowledged or co-regulated with, which is like the bare minimum of what we should be expecting in our relationships, whether that is with friends, whether that is with family. Co-regulation and interdependence is a core foundation of a healthy relationship. So if you are not getting the bare minimum, you are going to feel that trauma instead of heal from that trauma. These are our essential needs. We can't put our needs on the back burner. And in unhealthy relationships, we do put our needs on the back burner. So when I finally detoxed, when I stepped back and I started, finally engaging in relationships where I was feeling seen, where I was feeling heard, where I was co-regulating with somebody, and it was just nice. It was not a big deal. It was not a burden. I realized how easy it is for people to really be present and how healing it is. And I realized, wow, just even 6 months of having those types of relationships in my life, I was healing so rapidly. And it became frustrating that these other people could not give me the bare minimum of what I deserved in our relationships. It can make you really angry, actually. And maybe it's even good to process that anger, because that anger is setting a boundary and it's telling you I deserve better. I was losing a version of myself that I had built to survive these people who couldn't give me even the bare minimum. And I also began to feel something that I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not just silence, but sacred stillness, spaciousness, the absence of having to manage other people's discomfort with who I am. And then slowly I filled that space with people who really welcome this full spectrum of emotions within me. People who didn't recoil at my truth, and people who asked questions that made my nervous system exhale. So let's take some time to reflect now. You can write these down, you can say them softly to yourself, or just feel into them. Who in your life do you feel safer around when you're edited, agreeable, or performing? And who do you shrink for? Let that land. Who leaves you feeling resourced, expansive, and gently return to yourself? Who asks you how your soul is doing, not just your schedule? Those are your people. Where in your life are you mistaking history for intimacy? And where are you staying out of obligation and not connection? Be really honest with yourself on that one. It's hard. You don't owe anyone continued access to you simply because you've known them for a long time. History doesn't equal safety. And lastly, what would become possible if you stopped trying to be understood by people and committed to the people that do take the time to know you? You don't need to rush through this part. Even naming it is really sacred. This isn't about blame. It's about nervous system alignment. Your capacity to heal is directly shaped by who you are around. And your peace is not selfish. It is the soil from which your life can finally grow. Letting go is not a failure. It is an act of profound devotion to your future self. You are allowed to choose relationships where you are being met in your wholeness, not just tolerated in your fragments. Okay, so Revolutionary Act 4, astrology. Astrology saved me. It gave me a language for things I didn't already know how to explain, but felt in my body. It helped me understand why I felt so deeply, why I burned out every few months, why my nervous system was dysregulated, and when I was more vulnerable to feeling not inside of my body. So I looked at my chart, my transits, and I felt seen. The more and more I gravitated towards astrology, I started learning my patterns. And as I began to learn and understand these patterns that I had in what I was feeling, emoting, especially, I could become more prepared for internal bouts, right? Like I was able to really significantly lower my window of tolerance. It used to be when I was in a mood, you never know when the mood is going to end. It feels like it will never get better. But astrology reminds me of timing, that we're not in this moment forever. It also helps me make sense of what this moment is trying to teach me. So astrology really became this beautiful framework to help me not only understand my moods, but why they were showing up and how to do the inner work required. So now when something heavy moves through me, I don't ask what's wrong with me. I ask what's being activated in me. And that question is so much more compassionate. So let's do a quick practice. Think of a recent moment where you felt super overwhelmed. Now ask yourself, what part of me was being asked to grow? What part of me needed rest or gentleness instead of judgment? And sit with that answer for just a little bit. Astrology is not an escape. It's a mirror. And sometimes it's the only mirror that doesn't distort you. So maybe you were going through a Jupiter transit if you needed to grow in some capacity while this event was happening. Maybe you were going through a Saturn transit if you were being asked to rest. Neptune can also be a really tiring transit. Neptune on my Mars was one of the most exhausting transits I've ever been through. I could have sat with that feeling thinking there was something wrong with me. I could have worried about it and gone down WebMD for hours. I'm sure we all have been there. But instead, I had astrology as a framework. I understood that this was a moment of burnout, a moment of rest. And because of that, I was able to schedule myself accordingly, so I didn't have the pressure of needing to be on for everyone else. Which, of course, if you've dealt with chronic illness or if you have dealt with burnout, can be quite exhausting within itself. So astrology allowed me to really work within my own framework, help me understand my moods, my patterns, my habits, and it helped me really anticipate what was going to happen next, not so I could prevent it, because you can't prevent life, guys, unfortunately, but you can learn how to work with it, and I think that is super important. So if you're following me already, there's an interest in astrology, and I'm not, again, trying to sell you an astrology package, but I would encourage you to really kind of look at the transits that you have gone through during these heavy bouts of depression or anger or anxiety or trauma, and find your own patterns, because they can really be helpful in terms of healing. They can be very helpful in terms of understanding and subscribing some sort of meaning to the things in which we experience. Things don't just happen in vain, and there are always opportunities for us to learn. So astrology has really become not just a guide map, but a true friend in the experience of healing, to me anyways. So I would encourage you, if you're already here, obviously there is an interest in astrology, so really try to explore that. Okay, so Revolutionary X5, building a spiritual practice. I grew up in survival mode. Maybe you did too, where silence meant danger, where stillness was being punished, where the only way to be seen was to be useful, where you had to earn your rest, justify your breath, and prove your right to softness. I had a family member who believed very firmly in tough love. And no matter how many times I shared with them that tough love doesn't exist, that it's just abuse, and it's now been proven to be just that, especially when a young brain is developing, I just had this ingrained to me that everything that I felt was too much, that I was too much, that I wasn't tough enough. And it really, really, really tragically caused a lot of dysfunction in my life. I was always working. I was always proving. If I had a headache, I worked. If I had anxiety, I smiled. If I was breaking down, I felt guilty. I waited until I was, alone to really express my darkness, because I knew that this family member told me that they were not going to be the family member who was there to listen. They would only be there when I wanted to fix something. So I knew that co-regulation with this person was when I wasn't quite ready to make a choice in my life, or I wasn't clear on that choice, was just not going to happen. Even my healing became a project to optimize. My spirituality became another place to perform. I used to think that if I did enough rituals, read the right books, or journaled every morning, aligned my chakras, cleared my cords, recited my affirmations, learned how to say the right things in just the right tone of voice, then maybe I'd be okay. But that wasn't spiritual. That was hypervigilance in a prettier outfit. So over time, something cracked open. Not all at once, not with some grand awakening, but it was more like a slow unfurling, remembering, a permission. I began to build a spiritual practice that wasn't rooted in fear, and I stopped trying to fix myself. I started sitting in silence, not to get answers, but to hear what was already there. I lit candles without asking permission for anything, and I prayed without words. I offered my presence instead of performance. And some days my practice was, drinking tea while watching the shadows on my wall. Some days it was lying on the floor with my hand on my chest, whispering, "You're safe now." And some days it was rage, crying in the shower, letting the steam carry it upward. And some days it was nothing. But even that was holy. I realized that the most powerful spiritual practice that I could build was one where I stopped abandoning myself. Not just the high vibe version, not the tidy parts, but the messy ones, the anxious one, the exhausted one who just wanted to stop trying so hard to earn peace. I used to think that spirituality had to look like, crystals or chants, something to do. But sometimes spirituality is canceling the meeting. Sometimes it's, saying no to someone who wants too much of you. Sometimes it's turning off your phone and crying until something in your chest just softens. Spirituality, for me at least, is a practice of timing. Understanding that timing is super important and working with my own sense of personal timing. It became a home I was allowed to return to without punishment, and that really restructured everything. Because once I stopped chasing, I could finally co-create. I stopped begging the universe for signs, and I started trusting the quiet knowing inside me. I stopped rushing towards the next big thing. I started asking, what is aligned with my nervous system? Is this a decision that I can carry with grace, or will it make me abandon myself? It helped me build trust in myself, trust in the timing of my life. So you might want to gently ask yourself, what would shift if you began to trust yourself? Not just in theory, but in the micro moments. In the pauses before I say yes when I mean no. In the flickers of intuition I always override. In the grief that I carry like it's shame. And what would shift if you trusted your body knows things before your mind can catch up? That's a big one. I used to worry, especially around finances, and I don't want to discredit. Money issues are a core issue when it comes to depression, when it comes to suicidal thoughts. This is especially true for my neurodivergent community because jobs are much harder to come by for us. I don't want to minimize that. But developing my spiritual practice really taught me how to trust that the universe was going to take care of me. And so far, it has. Instead of worrying, when these feelings come up that say, oh no, rent is just around the corner. How am I going to get X amount of money? I got to do this. I got to hustle. Instead, I started rewiring my brain to say, I'm going to do this ritual tonight. And I know that this money is coming to me. And I have not been disappointed in that. Sometimes it doesn't happen as fast as I would like. That can be frustrating. That can cause worry. That can cause anxiety. That can cause loops. But I have been able to get what I needed each and every time. I haven't become homeless yet. And granted, I'm a little lucky. I have, certain privileges that others don't. But keeping and practicing daily and building that trust in myself was futile. I watched myself finally move through a lot of my money blocks that I'd been carrying my entire life, that I saw generations before me carry their whole life when I got out of that scarcity mindset and started trusting myself. I built a relationship with deities, with my guides, and that also helped me trust myself. So building a spiritual practice was really paramount in trusting the timing of my life and learning to trust myself. And I encourage you, if that resonates for you, start building that altar, start building that relationship, because it really helped me work through a lot of these difficulties in terms of taking care of myself, trusting myself, and getting to where I need to be in the world. And most of all, really trusting the timing of my own life, and that it's not always going to happen in the way that I want it to happen and in the timing that I want it to happen, but it will happen if it's meant to happen. In the words of Lauryn Hill, everything is everything. Everything that will be, will be. Now for Revolutionary Act 6, cleansing my energy. I cleanse every day. Not because I'm scared, but because I am sacred. A few drops of Art of the Roots uncrossing oil in a spray bottle, a mist of Florida water in my diffuser and on my feet, a candle lit not for drama, but for devotion. Before bed, after my shower, I lay on the floor and I thank my guides and I offer gratitude. I speak an affirmation, and I don't take my day into my sleep. So, cleansing, extremely important. Your crown chakra and your feet, these are portals. These are the places that are the absolute most important place to cleanse. So my daily routine is to use that Art of the Root uncrossing oil on my feet, on my crown. Sometimes I also use the Art of the Root Fiery Wall of Protection, another great one. You can also use a banishing oil if that feels right, or taking a salt bath, especially during the full moon periods. In fact, that's what we're supposed to be doing during the 2-week periods between the full moon and the new moon. This is the perfect time to release, to cleanse. I'll watch Reiki videos, clearing my energy, cord cutting videos, subliminals, anything I can do to clear and cleanse my energy. So let's try this. Close your eyes. Imagine a waterfall of golden light pouring down over your head, your shoulders, your spine, washing away anything heavy, anything false. Now say out loud or silently, only love and truth remain. This is a simple way in which we can clear our energy. And I think the daily practice of clearing our energy definitely helped me reset my day, especially on days that were difficult. Art of the Root is one of my favorite companies to work with. I swear to God, I don't make any money from promoting them. They just happen to work for me. And their uncrossing bath especially, you can get the oil or you can get the bath. They both have been paramount to my practice. Not only do they smell heavenly, but I really feel amazing after I use it. Another thing I love to do to clear my energy is rose water spray. Roses have the highest vibration of any other plant on the planet. So they are incredibly beautiful to work with, especially if you're into working with Venetian energy, but for clearing, to raising the level of your feeling. I love putting it on my crown chakra. I love putting it on my feet. I do so, especially when I get out of the shower. It's a nice little reset. So adding, some clearing our energy is how we come home to ourselves. It's how we remember what belongs to us and what never did. It sets a boundary. We're not like meant to carry the weight of every room that we walk into, and we're not meant to hold the unsaid grief of our families, our partners, our clients, our timelines. We are not meant to function with static in our field or noise in our heads and other people's fear tangled in our joy. When I learned how to clear my energy, I didn't just feel lighter. I felt realer. I felt what my actual baseline was before the people pleasing, before the emotional labor, before the ancestral expectations. And for the first time, I didn't have to earn clarity. I just had to let go of everything that wasn't mine. So let me ask you, what are you holding on to that isn't yours? Where are you confusing empathy with entanglement? And what would be possible if your energy field was just yours again? You don't need to be psychic to know something is off. You just need to listen with your body. Your tension is a message. Your fatigue is a signal. Your resistance is sacred data. Clearing energy can look a lot like prayer, movement, salt, sound. I love sound baths. If you're interested in doing a sound bath, there are some great YouTube videos. 432 megahertz. That is the love vibration. Ooh, sounds so beautiful. It's so clearing. You know, you can use smoke, you can use water, you can use wind. But more than anything, it is intention. It is the radical choice to say, I will no longer carry what doesn't belong to me. And sometimes it's this simple. You know, I release what isn't mine. I call my energy back. I trust myself to hold, you know, what is true. So say it again, not with your head, but with your body. Feel it as a shift. Because clearing energy is not just something we do. It's something we become fluent in. It is the act of remembering that your inner space is sacred ground, guys. You get to choose who lives in your field. You know, you get to choose what stories you carry. You get to choose what stays, who stays, what you set down. Clearing is how we make room for truth and for trust, for something deeper than survival. For the soft, quiet voice inside you that was never gone. It was just crowded. So clearing energy is extremely important and something I had to make part of my everyday practice. I have actually 2 great workshops on this. One is with Love Sackhoff on clearing your energy that can be found on Astro School if you join as a member. And then the other one, which is Spiritual Cleansing 101, which is also a really great little guide. It teaches you how to do like the banishing ritual of the pentagram and clearing breath work. It's a great listen. So you guys might want to check that out. Now for Revolutionary X7, co-regulation with others on the same journey. So the first time someone told me you're too much, I wanted to simply just die. Because they meant it. Because they didn't need me to be who I was. They needed me to be much smaller in order to love me. When someone welcomes your intensity, when someone doesn't flinch at your grief or your joy, when they meet your eyes and they stay, that's not casual, that's sacred. We heal in safe connection. We co-regulate through trust. Most of us were taught to abandon ourselves. You know, this happens very early, before we even learned how to listen. We were trained to outsource truth, to wait for approval before we acted, to check how others would feel before we checked in with ourselves, to silence our hunger, to question our anger, and to doubt our intuition. And most importantly, to edit our joy. Maybe no one ever explicitly said, don't trust yourself, but it was implied. It was in the way that no one believed you. It was in the way you were told to smile through it. It was in the apology that you were waiting for that never came. And over time, something inside you got quieter. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't safe. So how do we begin to trust our own voice again? And who in the world taught us to mute our emotions, to mute our voice? You start by noticing the places where you still override your body's truth. The yes that lives inside your mouth when your stomach says no. The way that you explain yourself too much. The way that you ask 3 friends what they think before you allow yourself to know what you think. The way you gaslight yourself into saying, into pushing, into tolerating. The way you rehearse being palatable even in your inner monologue. Self-trust doesn't arrive fully formed. It returns in fragments. It returns in tiny little choices. It returns in the moment that you say, I feel this, and that's enough reason to listen. You rebuild your trust by treating your inner voice not as a liability, but as an oracle. So ask yourself, where did I learn to doubt myself, and whose voice replaced my own in my head? When did I stop believing that what I feel is real? And then the harder question, what would my life look like if I trusted myself fully? Not in hindsight, not after 5 signs and 2 apologies and a socially acceptable reason, but in real time, in raw, unfiltered, inconvenient truth. This act of trusting your own voice is revolutionary because it really breaks every unspoken rule of systems built on obedience. Systems that depend on your confusion, on your hesitation, on your silence. But trusting yourself means believing that your pain has intelligence, that your longings are not indulgent, that your rage is not irrational, and that your grief does not need to be explained. It just needs to be honored. Your boundaries do not require debate. There is a deeper knowing that beneath the noise, it does not scream. It does not threaten. It does not beg. It just simply waits. And when you finally choose to listen, it doesn't say, I told you so. It says, welcome back. So here's what I want you to remember. You were never too much, and you were never too sensitive. You were never broken for feeling deeply. You were never wrong for wanting more. You just lived in a world that benefited from your doubt. But your body has always known. Your voice has always tried. Your truth has always been there, humming beneath the static, waiting for you to return. So place your hand on your throat at this moment, your throat chakra, maybe on your heart, on the space that clenches when you're about to betray yourself again. And say gently, without needing to believe it all at once, I trust my own voice. Again, louder. I trust my own voice. And if you can't say it yet, that's fine. You can say, I am learning to trust the sound of my own knowing. Because you are. Because you can. Because there is no guru, no partner, no parent, no teacher, no savior that can know your truth better than you. And when you start to trust yourself, you stop abandoning yourself. You stop betraying yourself in order to keep others comfortable. You stop negotiating with your intuition. And that is a revolutionary act, because that is how everything changes. When I started co-regulating my nervous system with people that were on the same journey as me, I realized how much, even though I had been around other people, I had been surviving in isolation. And just how easy it is to heal when you're around safe people. It's not hard to be kind. I had spent years believing that independence was strength, that needing others made me feel weak, because that's what I saw in my family. I performed stability. I faked calm. I tried to quote unquote self-soothe in the same way that I had been taught to quote unquote self-discipline from my family members that believed in the idea of tough love, though that has been proven psychologically to be abuse, self-neglect, self-abandonment. That doesn't teach strength. That just teaches hatred of yourself. My body told a different story, but I wasn't listening to my body because I was never taught to listen to my body. No wonder my body was always buzzing, always scanning for danger, even in moments of stillness. I didn't know what safety felt like, only the performance of it, because that is what I saw growing up in my family. Then somebody looked at me with softness, and they actually stayed. They didn't try to fix me. They wanted to know me, truly know me. They breathed slower when I was panicked. They didn't flinch when I cried. They offered me warmth. Instead of shrinking from it, I let myself receive it. My nervous system responded like a starving animal, slowly learning that food would come again, and that it was okay to rest. Co-regulation isn't dependency. It is repair. It is the medicine. It is the body learning that it no longer has to do everything alone. That safety is not a solo achievement. That healing happens in relationship. Every time I exhaled in someone else's presence, something in me rewired. I stopped seeing vulnerability as a threat. I stopped mistaking hyper independence for resilience. And I stopped confusing self-abandonment for strength. The truth is, we are all wired for connection. Our hearts beat in rhythm with each other. Our nervous systems speak in breath and tone and proximity. And when you begin to co-regulate, you begin to allow someone to be with you in the hard moment without rushing you out of it, without saying, "You can only call me when you have a solution." How that damaged me. It told me I don't have to hold this alone anymore, even if I don't have the answers. So ask yourself, where did I learn that I had to survive by myself? And what would shift if I allow someone to stay while I was still unraveling? What would it mean to let another body help me regulate mine without shame? Co-regulation is a radical act of repatterning, of letting love into the places that have only known aloneness. It is a sacred reminder that healing doesn't mean sealing yourself off. It means opening, slowly, cautiously, to the possibility that safety is not something you have to earn, but something that you can experience in real time, with real people, time and time again. And that, my friends, is revolutionary. There is a particular grief that comes in being in relationship with someone who doesn't try to understand you. Not someone that doesn't get you, because honestly, very few people ever will, but someone who doesn't even try. Someone who disappears the moment your life stops being convenient. Someone who wants the version of you that's cheerful, that's helpful, that's high functioning and available. And then either punishes you for anything else or just disappears when it's hard. When you're neurodivergent or chronically ill, traumatized or depressed, you don't need perfect people. You don't need saviors. You need someone who listens long enough to know that your reactions aren't random, that your body isn't a machine that can be rebooted, that your shutdowns, your fatigue, your silences, they're not flaws. They are survival responses. But low-effort people do not listen. They don't. They just simply don't. What they do is project. They project their fantasies of what you should be, how you should act, how much energy you should have, and how you should bounce back, and how you should behave. And when you don't meet that fantasy, you become the problem. Not the trauma, not the system, not the misunderstanding. You. And that kind of distortion, that kind of abandonment in plain sight, it's violent. It is an act of violence. It tells you again and again that your pain is too much, that your way of existing is inconvenient, that if you can't be palatable, you don't deserve love. This is the suicide seed. Not the pain itself, but the message that your pain makes you unlovable, that your truth is an obstacle, that your existence in the realest, most human state is simply not worth someone else's effort. And here's what's terrifying. Over time, you start to believe them. You start to internalize the projections as truth. You start to ask yourself, maybe I am too much. Maybe I could just be easier as a person. Maybe I need to give up parts of myself to do that. Maybe I could stop feeling so much. Maybe I could stop being so sick. Maybe then they will stay and understand you. But no amount of contortion will keep the wrong people close. Their inability to see you is not your failure. Their shallow love is not a mirror of your worth. It is simply a map of their own limitations. We don't talk enough about the slow erosion that happens when we are loved on condition. The way you stop expressing your needs because no one meets them. The way that you stop talking about your illness or your fear because all it gets you is silence. The way that you shrink or smile, nod, disassociate, just to keep the peace. But peace that costs you your truth is not peace at all. It is performance. It's exile. So healing begins when you stop asking people to come into the fire with you who've only ever admired you from the distance. Healing begins when you say, I will not be loved for a version of myself that's easier for you to digest. Healing begins when you say, I deserve relationships where effort is not conditional on my emotional convenience. It hurts to walk away from people you've trained yourself to settle for. It hurts to realize how long you've been performing in order to be tolerated. It hurts to walk away from people that you trained yourself to settle for. It hurts to realize how long you've been performing in order to be tolerated. I must say that again. But I promise you this. The pain of being misunderstood in your truth is far greater than the loneliness of being alone in it. Because, at least when you're alone, you get to be honest. You get to hear your own voice again. You get to relearn what safety feels like. You get to find the people who don't flinch at your grief, who don't ghost your struggle, who stay. Not because you're easy, but because they're committed to seeing you as you are. We were never meant to contort ourselves into palatable versions of our pain. We were never meant to survive on low-effort love. We were never meant to carry the shame of being misunderstood and called it normal. So if you're in that place right now, if you feel like you're too complicated, too reactive, too tired, too much, I want you to know this. You're not too much. You are too honest for people who do not know how to meet honesty with effort. You're too feeling for people who have never sat with their own pain. And you are too awake for those who are still numbing. But you're not too much. You are just ready for relationships where understanding is not optional, where effort is not seasonal, and where your nervous system is not the price of admission. Where your healing is not seen as a burden, but as a sacred part of who you are becoming. Low-effort people will always try to convince you that love is a prize to be earned. Earned through what? Self-erasure? But revolutionary love, the kind that makes healing possible, that kind of love demands nothing but the truth. And you, in all your messy, intricate, beautiful truth, are much more worthy of that. So I just want to thank each and every one of you who is tuning in today for a little bit of a pep talk. And I hope that you're receptive to some of the tools that I provided today. I want to also say that I'm including a few extra tools down below and resources if this is something that you personally struggle with. And I'm also going to include some book recommendations that really helped me shift my mindset. But I want to thank each and every person who tuned in today. This is not an easy conversation to have, and thank you for showing up for yourself. You are taking the first step. It's not easy, but we can make it through when we find safe relationships and rewiring our mind. If I can make it through, each and every one of you can also do the same. And don't hesitate to reach out for help if you need it. I'm including some resources down below that can be very helpful in those situations. I'm sending you all love today. Thank you so much for being here.